I spent 40 years teaching how the great masters manipulate perception and how true fame is built. I never once thought I'd be forced to apply that knowledge to publicly destroy my own grandson. My name is Howard, and I am 69 years old. I retired from the university 2 years ago, a distinguished professor of art history. I understand images, I understand facades, and I understand how light and shadow can tell a lie more convincingly than words ever could. This is the story of how I created the most devastating art installation of my career, using my grandson's perfect, drone-filmed lawn as the canvas for his public execution. My grandson, Blake, is 25, and locally he's a walking saint. An influencer with a stunning smile, perfectly coiffed hair, and a platform built on positive vibes and community volunteering. He's a social media hero, constantly broadcasting his good deeds, holding the door, picking up a single piece of trash, or posing in front of an animal shelter. But behind the camera, Blake is a self-absorbed monster, convinced his shallow fame makes him superior to everyone, especially his elders. The arrogance radiated off him like cheap cologne. If you enjoy hearing complex true stories and detailed revenge tales that prove true justice is often the cleverest justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss how the rest of this scheme unfolds. The tipping point wasn't his endless narcissism, it was what he did to Evelyn, my wife. Evelyn is the true heart of our community. For 20 years, she has run the annual handcraft fair, raising thousands for the local animal shelter, a cause she poured her soul into. This year, she needed a boost. She asked Blake, her famous photogenic grandson, for a simple post, a quick shout-out on his feed, to bring in the younger crowd. He agreed condescendingly, telling her she needed to update her branding. The look he gave her when he said that, a dismissive, pitying glance, was the first punch. He waited until the very morning of Evelyn's sale. We had everything set up, the folding tables, the hand-knitted scarves, the freshly baked goods. We were waiting for the line that Blake was supposed to generate. The event started at 9. At 9:05 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from a local news blog. It wasn't about Evelyn's charity. It was a live stream from Blake. He was standing in the town square, surrounded by news cameras, dramatically handing a large check, a check for money he had likely fundraised weeks ago, to the head of a different, much flashier youth-focused charity. He titled his stream, "The Future of Giving, Real Impact, Real Results." The timing was no coincidence. It was a direct, calculated assault. The few people who did show up to Evelyn's fair were mostly old friends. The silence where a crowd should have been was deafening. The sales were abysmal. Evelyn stood by the donation jar, her face pale, watching her grandson on a stranger's phone screen, realizing she had been used as a pathetic footnote in his grand narrative. Later that evening, after Evelyn had packed away the unsold crafts and shed a few quiet tears that broke my heart, Blake arrived for a mandated family dinner. He walked in, chest puffed out, congratulating himself on his viral success. When I confronted him calmly about the timing and his promise to Evelyn, he didn't just dismiss it. He launched into a truly vile monologue. "Grandpa, honestly, that old knit and bake sale thing is so passé, it's embarrassing. People follow me for action, for real volunteering, not dusty old scarves. Evelyn needs to face facts. Her methods are archaic. She had her chance. If she wants views, she needs to be relevant, like me." He was smiling as he said it. A triumphant, fake, humble smile, completely devoid of empathy. It was that smile, and the immediate agreement from his mother, my own daughter, who claimed we were just jealous of his success, that sealed his fate. In that moment, I stopped seeing Blake as family and started seeing him as a canvas. He had destroyed my wife's spirit. I decided I would destroy the only thing he truly cared about, his untouchable public image. And I knew exactly where to start, his perfectly manicured, pristine, world-famous lawn. The moment Blake finished his vile speech about Evelyn needing to be relevant, the air in the dining room turned icy. It wasn't the words themselves that wounded us most. It was the casual, effortless cruelty behind them. He truly believed he was doing the world a favor by sweeping aside my wife's earnest, heartfelt efforts. Evelyn, who normally stood up for herself, just looked down at her hands, defeated. The man who was supposed to be her grandson had just publicly humiliated her charity and then doubled down on the insult right in our home. I pushed back my chair. "Blake," I said, my voice dangerously level, "you deliberately sabotaged her event. You promised to help and then pulled this stunt to steal the focus. That is not real volunteering. That is performance for profit." This is where the real drama started. Blake's mother, my own daughter Sarah, immediately jumped to his defense. "Dad, stop it. You're just proving Blake's point. You and Mom are so resistant to change. He's a success story. He raised money. All you two can do is whine because he didn't advertise your little craft fair. Honestly, you're both just jealous of his youth and his platform." Hearing my daughter side with the ego-driven influencer over her own mother, over the woman who taught her the meaning of compassion, felt like a physical blow. It was a complete breakdown of trust. The family unit fractured right there over a plate of untouched roast beef. Blake just smirked, knowing his mother's support meant he was untouchable. He had successfully isolated us. He finished his dessert, gave a breezy fake hug to his mother, and left without so much as a nod to Evelyn. That night I sat up with Evelyn. She didn't cry then. She was past tears. She just sat silently, staring into the darkness. "He was right, wasn't he, Howard?" she whispered, her voice fragile. "We are irrelevant. My work is irrelevant." That sentence, that absolute surrender in her tone, extinguished my anger and replaced it with a cold, clear, intellectual determination. I realized I couldn't fight Blake with emotion or ethics. His entire career was based on ignoring both. If I argued with him, he'd just post a video about toxic generational conflict and gain sympathy. If I went to the police, they'd laugh at me. No, I had to fight him on his own terms, the terms of image and public perception. I had taught students for decades how Renaissance artists used subtle symbolism and visual cues to manipulate the viewer's belief. Blake's career was nothing more than a carefully curated public art project. His life was his canvas, and his perfect lawn, the one he constantly filmed from his drone, was his most sacred, visible, and vulnerable space. I decided in that moment that I would not argue with him. I would not call the police. I would not touch him. Instead, I would become the anonymous conceptual artist who would use his biggest pride against him. I would paint a commentary on his lawn, a piece of performance art so cryptic and so visually damning that the public would destroy the facade for me. The idea was brilliant because it was entirely nonviolent, entirely legal, and entirely focused on shattering his most valuable asset, his brand. My revenge had to be a work of art. My mind immediately went to the logistical details of how to paint a massive, critical symbol on his grass without ever setting foot on his property. Evelyn was asleep when I finally went to bed, her breath shallow and uneven. I couldn't sleep. The image of her face, crushed by the casual malice of her own grandson, burned behind my eyelids. That night, the retired professor was replaced by a strategist. I needed to understand the enemy's defenses. I pulled out my laptop and did something I rarely did. I immersed myself in Blake's world. I scrolled through his Instagram, his Twitter, his YouTube shorts. It was a dizzying kaleidoscope of engineered perfection. Every photo was a testament to his curated life. Perfect lighting, flawless outfits, and endless shots of his house. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for the anchor of his image, the thing he showcased most proudly. And there it was, repeatedly, almost obsessively, his lawn. Blake's house is immaculate, but his lawn is his masterpiece. It's an expanse of emerald green, meticulously cut, manicured, and weed-free. He frequently films drone shots of it for his meditation moments and perfect mornings. It was more than a lawn. It was a symbol of his control, his success, and his flawless life. It was his public canvas, and it suddenly looked like the most vulnerable piece of real estate in the county. I realized then that destroying his image was far more effective than destroying his property. Actual vandalism would make him a martyr. A lawsuit would make him a victim. My solution had to be an intellectual, visual attack that would force him to discredit himself. As an art historian, I knew how powerful a visual commentary could be. My goal wasn't to ruin his lawn physically, it was to ruin its meaning. I remembered studying a specific type of conceptual art, land art, and earthworks, where the medium isn't paint, but the natural environment itself. The perfect, pristine quality of his lawn was the medium. The message would be delivered using the most benign, ordinary, and legal materials imaginable. Things he couldn't call the police about. The challenge was immense. How do you create a massive, recognizable symbol visible from a drone without ever stepping on the grass and using only harmless materials? The precision had to be perfect. The symbol had to be instantly recognizable as a sign of distress or mockery, something that would immediately clash with his perfect life aesthetic. A giant weeping symbol, a broken heart, something that screamed, "The hero is a fraud." My blood, which had been boiling with frustration, now felt cold and purposeful. I started a new document on my computer, not with lecture notes, but with the title, Operation Conceptual Vandalism. I began the first phase of my plan, gathering intelligence. I needed to know the exact distance from my property line to his, the chemical composition of his grass to ensure my paint wouldn't kill it, and the optimal time to execute the art project. I was no longer an angry grandpa. I was a retired professor embarking on the most precise, high-stakes project of my life. This wouldn't be a fast attack. This was going to be the slowest, most public, and most humiliating exposure he could ever face. My revenge, I knew, had to be bulletproof. Blake's entire life was built on legal correctness and surface perfection. If I gave him an inch of legal ground, he would twist it into a PR victory. This wasn't about petty spite. It was about exposing a hypocrite without suffering the consequences myself. My first 2 days were spent not in the garden, but hunched over old plat maps and reading local ordinances online. I became intimately familiar with the legal definition of trespass, nuisance, and vandalism in our county. The key was the property line. Blake's lawn abutted a portion of my backyard where our old chain-link fence separated us. The rule was clear: do not cross the fence line. Vandalism required destruction or damage. My materials, organic, non-toxic garden supplies, would eventually wash away or be absorbed by the soil, likely enhancing the grass in the long run. My art would be a temporary visual statement, not permanent damage. Legally, I was on solid ground, provided I kept my feet on my side of the demarcation line. The real challenge was the execution. Blake's famous drone shots captured the center of his lawn, which was a good 40 feet from the boundary line. To create a symbol large enough to be seen from the air, I would need to work at an impossible distance. I needed surgical precision on a massive scale. I went to the garden store, adopting the persona of a senile old man preparing for a massive landscaping project. I spent hours examining tools. Normal fertilizer spreaders wouldn't work. They were too scattershot. I needed something that could direct a precise stream of fine powder over a long distance. I settled on a highly specialized, industrial-grade seed applicator with a surprisingly long, custom-built extension arm that looked absurdly cumbersome. I explained to the young clerk that I was trying to fertilize the difficult-to-reach patch of weeds behind my shed. He just nodded, probably thinking I was eccentric. The next step was measurement. I retrieved my old transit and laser distance measurer from the garage, tools I hadn't used since a brief but intense phase of amateur backyard astronomy 20 years ago. Under the cover of dusk, I set up the equipment on my side of the yard. I mapped out the invisible grid of Blake's property, calculating the exact trajectory needed to deposit my paint in the correct spots. I determined that to create a simple 10-foot wide symbol, I needed to master a throw distance of exactly 43 feet, all while angling the material to hit the grass, not the wind. It was less like gardening and more like advanced artillery targeting. The whole process was absurdly tense, knowing that one wrong move, one dropped tool, one loud sound could alert a neighbor, or worse, Blake, who had high-tech security cameras everywhere. My paint would consist of 3 parts: finely sifted white builder's sand for the immediate outline, a dark, nutrient-rich soil mix for shadows, and most crucially, a concentrated, fast-acting organic lime mixture. Lime temporarily lightens grass, making the pattern intensely visible within hours. All of it was completely organic and legally harmless. My arsenal was ready, my canvas was waiting. The only thing left was the design and the timing. The silent precision of the planning was now far more satisfying than any shouting match could have been. With the logistical challenge of distance conquered in the previous step, I turned my attention fully to the art. This wasn't merely about scattering some material, it was about creating a definitive, viral visual statement that would immediately destroy the public's perception of Blake. As an art historian, I knew that in the age of fast media, simplicity is power. Complex symbolism would be lost. The message had to be instantaneous and emotionally charged. I considered a large, clear capital letter L for liar, but that was too aggressive and could be easily removed. It lacked conceptual depth. I settled on something far more insidious, a giant stylized weeping face. Not an emoji, but a clean, graphic symbol, 2 clear, empty eyes, a thin, downturned mouth, and 2 long, noticeable streaks for tears. It had to look like a mask of despair, plastered onto his mask of success. This image, viewed from above, would suggest shame, guilt, or secret suffering, perfectly undermining his positive vibes brand. I spent hours sketching the design on graph paper, meticulously translating the coordinates from my laser measurements into placement points for the fertilizer applicator. I knew Blake frequently filmed from the roofline of his house and occasionally used a drone that flew at a specific altitude. The design had to maximize contrast at that particular high-angle perspective. My palette was also finalized. I needed materials that wouldn't kill the grass, but would create immediate visual shock. The tears contrasting outline. A mixture of finely powdered dolomite lime and white silica sand. The lime gives the grass a temporary yellow-white tinge due to pH change, and the sand provides visible texture. It's harmless, actually conditioning the soil, but from the air, it would look starkly unnatural. The face, textural depth. A high-contrast, dark mixture of peat moss and ironite-rich lawn fertilizer. This would create deep dark green or brown patches that would sink into the existing lawn, providing the shadow and depth for the eyes and mouth. I meticulously measured the correct amounts. This wasn't a gardening error, this was controlled application. I needed exactly the right ratio to ensure the pattern would emerge within hours, but slowly enough that Blake wouldn't immediately realize what was happening until the sun hit it just right and the drone flew overhead. I viewed the finished plan with cold satisfaction. The piece would be titled, in my mind, Performativity. It was a visual critique of his entire public life, an unanswerable question mark placed on his perfect facade. What did the crying face mean? Was it a confession? Was it a breakdown? Was it an attack? The ambiguity was the true power of the art. Blake could remove the materials, but he couldn't erase the question left in the public's mind. Now, all I needed was a clear, windless night. The perfect canvas deserves the perfect conditions. The anticipation was intense. I was about to create a scandal that would make all his volunteering look like a lie. The night I chose was perfect, moonless, cloudless, and, crucially, absolutely still. Not a whisper of wind. At 3 a.m., the neighborhood was cloaked in the deep, heavy silence of the suburbs. I put on dark clothing, pulled on a pair of soft-soled shoes, and quietly slipped into the backyard. I felt like a seasoned bank robber, except my loot was satisfaction, and my weapon was a $60 fertilizer spreader with an absurdly long extension arm. I had pre-measured the sections of my own yard to mark the precise launch points. I taped a small, dim red light, the kind a fisherman uses, to the end of the applicator arm, not for visibility, but for trajectory. If the beam wavered, I knew the line would be spoiled. The work was excruciatingly slow. I had to stretch the long arm out over the chain-link fence, the weight of the material distribution hopper making my 70-year-old arms ache immediately. I couldn't lean against the fence. I couldn't make a sound. I was focused purely on the invisible coordinates on Blake's lawn. First, the tears. I carefully released the fine white lime and sand mixture, creating 2 long, precise streaks 40 feet away. It was a tedious, agonizing dance of extending, holding my breath, applying a tiny amount, retracting, moving 2 feet down the line, and repeating. I had to visualize the finished symbol in the darkness, trusting my initial laser measurements entirely. The materials, being organic, fell silently onto the velvety grass. Every 15 minutes I froze, listening. I imagined Blake's motion sensor lights flashing on, his cameras panning toward the noise. The tension was immense. Not the fear of jail, but the fear of failure, of having my masterpiece ruined before it could even be seen. After an hour, I moved on to the eyes and the downturned mouth, switching the hopper to the darker peat moss and ironite mix. This required an even more delicate touch, as the material was heavier and prone to clumping. I was essentially painting in the dark with a massive, unwieldy brush. My back screamed, my shoulders burned, but the image of Evelyn's defeated face kept me focused. This wasn't just revenge. It was an act of fierce, desperate protection. By 5:30 a.m., just as the sky began to bleed a faint, colorless gray, I completed the last detail of the crying symbol. I had used nearly 3 hours to apply less than 50 pounds of legal gardening supply. I carefully dismantled the long arm, wiping down every section of my side of the fence, making sure no trace of the operation remained on my property. I stood back, exhausted, and looked across the yard. In the weak pre-dawn light, the symbol was barely visible, just a slight variation in the lawn's texture, a bizarre shadow that seemed to shimmer on the perfect green. But I knew that as soon as the sun rose fully and the temporary chemical reaction of the lime kicked in, the symbol would scream. The execution was complete. The art was in place. Now the rest was up to the public. I barely slept. The minute the clock hit 7 a.m., I was in the backyard sipping coffee, pretending to admire my fence line. The sun had crested the horizon, and the light was sharp and unforgiving. I squinted across at Blake's lawn, my heart hammered against my ribs. It was perfect. The fine layer of lime and sand had worked exactly as planned, creating a brilliant, startling white outline for the eyes and the tears. The dark moss mixture gave the mouth a shadowed, downturned depth. 40 feet away, staring back at Blake's pristine home, was a giant, unmistakable mask of sorrow. It looked like the grass itself was weeping. The beauty of my piece was its subtlety from ground level. Blake drove out of his garage at 7:30 a.m., recording a quick video for his Instagram story, something about starting the day right. He walked past the installation, mere feet from its edge, and didn't look down. He was so focused on the camera lens and his own reflection that he was blind to the massive symbol beneath his feet. He wouldn't see it until he used his drone, or until someone else showed him the view from above. That was my cue. I carefully climbed onto the flat portion of my roof, my own legal vantage point, with my camera and a telephoto lens. I took several high-resolution shots, perfectly centering the weeping face in the frame, making it look exactly like the kind of professional drone footage Blake himself would produce. The resulting image was a shocking contrast, the wealthy influencer's perfect life, stained by a giant existential question mark. I then retreated to my study. I used an old, disposable laptop and a secured network, not because the act was illegal, but because the source had to be untraceable. I set up a throwaway account on a popular local neighborhood gossip site and an anonymous email. I uploaded the best photograph. I crafted the message meticulously, avoiding any direct accusation. I wanted confusion, not clarity. My caption read, "New art installation in Blake's garden, the influencer's visual commentary on the real price of virtue, spotted this morning, what does it mean?" I then anonymously sent the photo link to 3 major local news bloggers who thrive on neighborhood drama and one of Blake's smaller, competitive influencer rivals. The job of the professor was over. The job of the audience was about to begin. I sat back, sipping cold coffee, and watched the digital world ignite. Within an hour, one local gossip blog had posted the photo with a sensationalized headline. Within 90 minutes, a second blog picked it up, adding a poll: "Is this vandalism or a confession?" The reaction was immediate. Blake's carefully controlled narrative began to crack. His followers weren't admiring it. They were genuinely confused and slightly disturbed. They saw the symbol of despair on the lawn of the happiest man alive. The question was now viral. Blake was officially on the clock. He had a massive conceptual statement on his lawn, and he had absolutely no idea where it came from or what it meant. And I, sitting in my study, was simply enjoying the opening night of my finest exhibition. The moment Blake realized what was happening must have been terrifying for him. He was probably planning his afternoon content when the first local blogger post hit his notifications. It wasn't just a photo, it was a high-angle, professional-looking image that made the giant weeping face on his famous lawn undeniable. His first reaction, which I tracked in real time on social media, was pure, unadulterated fury. He immediately posted a story claiming hateful vandalism and promising to find the coward who did this. He saw it as a physical attack on his property, which was exactly what I wanted him to think. The police arrived about an hour later, called by Blake in a state of high alarm. This was the moment of peak tension for me. I watched from my window, pretending to prune a bush, as a uniformed officer walked onto Blake's property. Blake was gesticulating wildly, pointing at the symbol, demanding an immediate investigation. The officer, however, was clearly confused. He knelt down, examined the material, and rubbed some between his fingers. It was obvious it wasn't paint, acid, or anything toxic. It was garden lime and some sand. I heard the muffled conversation drift across the yard. The officer was explaining to a furious Blake that since the perpetrator did not cross the property line and the materials were non-toxic, no crime had been committed. "Sir, it looks like someone used fertilizer to write a large sad face on your grass. We can't file this as vandalism. It's a strange choice of landscaping, maybe a prank, but not a police matter." The police refusal to act was a fatal blow to Blake's narrative. He couldn't play the victim of a crime. He was now merely the target of a bizarre conceptual statement. His next move was a frantic, unedited live stream. He looked visibly rattled, his perfect influencer composure finally shattered. "This is bullying," he ranted to his thousands of followers. "Someone is trying to destroy my message of positivity. They're jealous of our success." But the public didn't respond with sympathy. The narrative had shifted from "who did it" to "what does it mean?" People started digging up his past, remembering the timing of Evelyn's failed charity event. They started linking the weeping face to rumors of his self-serving actions. The comment section was brutal. "Why is the face crying, Blake? Are you actually sad about something you did? Did he put this on his own lawn as a confession? Maybe the real price of virtue is realizing you're a fake." The ambiguity was a psychological weapon. Blake couldn't prove it was vandalism, and he couldn't explain the meaning because the meaning, his hypocrisy, was too close to the truth. Then came the real tremor. I saw a notification from Brand Watch Weekly, an industry publication. They published a headline questioning whether Blake's sponsors would tolerate their brands being associated with a scandalous and potentially confessional art installation. One major soft drink company, which relied heavily on his wholesome image, issued a public statement saying they were reviewing their partnership in light of recent negative developments. The clock was ticking down, not on his ego, but on his income. The climax was finally in sight. The weekend was a blur of media frenzy. Blake's face, not the smiling, carefully filtered version, but the enraged, defensive one, was plastered all over local news feeds. But the true collapse didn't come from the public. It came from his wallet. On Monday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the paper when Evelyn gasped. She was watching Blake's latest update on her phone. He looked terrible, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. This was not a performance. This was a man under extreme duress. The final straw came from his largest commercial partner, a national sportswear brand whose motto was built on authenticity. The brand's representative didn't care that the police had dismissed it as a non-crime. They cared that the viral image of a giant weeping face suggested that their official spokesperson was either deeply troubled or, worse, a fraud engaged in some kind of self-confessional art project. The ultimatum was brutal and simple. Fix the narrative immediately, or they would trigger the morality clause and terminate his multi-million-dollar contract. Blake's carefully constructed empire was worth less than the bag of lime I'd purchased from the garden store. His brand was broken because he couldn't answer the conceptual question I had posed on his lawn. He realized then what I had planned all along. He couldn't fight the art. He couldn't clean the lawn fast enough. The pattern was set. The only way to save his career was to demonstrate genuine virtue, something he didn't possess. And the only genuine virtue story he had available was the one he had tried to destroy. Evelyn's charity. That is why he posted the video. It wasn't a confession of guilt to me, but a confession of necessity to his sponsors. He sat in front of his camera, and through visibly gritted teeth, he delivered the most humiliating public statement of his life. "I want to publicly and sincerely apologize," he started, his voice strained, "to my grandmother, Evelyn. In my drive to promote large-scale events, I failed to give the proper attention and respect to her incredibly valuable, crucial community work for the animal shelter. That was arrogant and wrong. My focus was misplaced. We need to support the people who do the real work on the ground." He didn't mention the weeping face, but he didn't have to. The apology was the answer to the installation. The giant crying symbol forced him to validate the very person he had mocked and betrayed. He sacrificed his ego to save his bank account. Evelyn watched the screen, tears welling up, not tears of sadness, but of vindication. It wasn't about the money he promised to donate now, a pathetic effort to recover face. It was about the validation. Her work was finally recognized by the arrogant boy who had dismissed it. I placed my hand on her shoulder, feeling the deep, silent satisfaction of the artist whose work had achieved its ultimate, conceptual goal. I destroyed his image using nothing but a lawn spreader, basic chemicals, and the power of public opinion. He will never know it was me. He will only know that his perfect life was ruined by a massive, weeping reminder that he is a fake. This was my masterpiece. Blake's public apology, although forced and clearly painful for him, was the official turning point. His career didn't end that day, he was too established for that, but his golden, untouchable facade was permanently fractured. The narrative had changed. His image now had a shadow, a giant weeping asterisk placed firmly in the middle of his perfect lawn. His new posts are noticeably more restrained, more genuinely focused on the community, because he knows he is constantly under scrutiny. He learned the hard way that true reputation is built on consistency, not just clever editing. As for Evelyn and me, we won. The massive media coverage of the weeping lawn drama, combined with Blake's public mea culpa, created a tidal wave of positive attention for the animal shelter. People wanted to support the real volunteer. We successfully held a small, impromptu relaunch of the craft fair, and this time the line stretched down the block. We raised more money for the shelter in one afternoon than we had in the previous 2 years combined. Evelyn was beaming, her spirit restored, her work validated. Our life returned to normal, but it was a happier, stronger normal. Evelyn and I share a quiet, beautiful secret. Sometimes, when Blake's drone buzzes overhead, I glance at her, and we exchange a small, knowing smile. He'll never know who the artist was, and I have no intention of telling him. My satisfaction comes not from his pain, but from Evelyn's restored joy and the knowledge that I used my intelligence, not violence, to ensure justice. My life, the quiet life of a retired professor, is now richer. I found a new purpose, defending the values I taught. I proved that the mind, armed with knowledge of art and law, is the most powerful weapon. We are happy, we are thriving, and we are finally at peace. But that leaves me with a question for you, the person listening to this whole tangled, tricky story. Considering the rules, the risk, and the sheer intellectual effort required to pull this off without breaking the law, did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you love this deep dive revenge story and want to hear more clever, true tales, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a complex story of justice. Thank you for listening.